Move on to question 9, the call on the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown, Malew, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture on what date since the 17th of December 2021 she has discussed the wearing of masks with the Director of Public Health.
Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. The Department is following public health advice and guidance to implement policies as defined by the Council of Ministers. The Department receives advice and support from public health as and when requested. Despite reports on social media, I corresponded with the Director of Public Health on the 29th of December 2021, ahead of the reopening of educational settings in January, and from a public health perspective on this matter, it was felt that there was no rationale for recommending any changes to the planned reopening of educational settings based on the mitigations that were already in place. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Minister. As part of the answer on the 4th of January, you clearly stated the Director of Public Health felt that mitigations that are currently in place were adequate for return to school, if you've just repeated then. So the Department has continued to use those mitigations. Did those discussions with the Director of Public Health on the 29th of December include specific reference to the minimal usage of masks and how some vulnerable children who should have been wearing masks had been too afraid to do so? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. As I've stated, the mitigations that were in place prior to schools returning in January, so there was no change to those mitigations. We were operating under level 2 of the Island Winter Plan, which said masks were expected.
Supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Minister. With regard to the meeting on the 29th of December, could a little bit more information please be provided? And ideally, are the minutes of that meeting and any recommendations from Public Health available that Tynwald members can have access to? Because at the moment, we're lacking the clarity. Both sides are saying something slightly different. And if we could actually see the written recommendations, the minutes of the meeting, I'm sure we'd feel much more confident about the situation. Thank you, Mr President.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. It wasn't a meeting, it was a proactive approach that I made as the Minister to the Director of Public Health to seek whether she felt there was any further mitigations that needed to be put in place in schools, and the recommendation was the current mitigations were felt appropriate and that there should be no changes to the opening of the schools.
Final supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Minister. In terms of that proactive approach, can I have a little bit more information about what time of day it was, what preparation that went into that? Was it kind of an off-the-cuff phone call that may have happened to the Director of Public Health as she was leaving for another meeting? In terms of what was the format of those discussions? Was it, as you suggested, just a quick call to base, got the clarification that you were continuing with things as they were? Was there any actual discussions about the current situation and how the mask usage was incredibly low and it could be having detrimental areas in other places such as retail stores, on the buses that were serving schools? Those areas were causing issues at the end of last term and they've continued to cause issues this term. Were they discussed? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. And I think the areas that the honourable members relating to have been discussed in the Council of Ministers. I actually emailed the Director of Public Health to see if there was anything extra that should be implemented. It was during the holiday periods. It was the 29th of December, and that was to help inform the guidance document that we send to all of our schools, which was sent out to our schools with any updated information. Thank you, Mr President.